news. And as a news guy, that's your job to point out those bad people. I've always felt that, you know, that I get real satisfaction out of that, you know. You know, whether it's some corporate pig or some bad guy from organized crime, you know, it's really nice to be able to expose those people for what they really are, you know.
Thank you for sharing that incredible history of Los Angeles. We appreciate you being here. Thank you, Mr. Blatchford. I want to backtrack a little bit to first entering Fox 11. Who are some of the, now that the riot is a few weeks away, who are some of the people that you meet at Fox 11? Some of the personalities. Who's there? Who's the anchors?
I mean, I knew them because I'd been working in town for 7 years by then. Chris Harris was the anchor then, and he died, you know, a few years after that. He had heart problems, and he was replaced. They brought John Beard over from Channel, who all Los Angeles people will know. Other people watching this on YouTube won't, but John was an anchor man in this town for 40 years and is really a great guy, a really great guy to work with, and I think very well known. I think he had a very unique communication skill. He sort of had a Clark Gable-ish look to him, you know, and he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he also had a great appreciation for what the news should be and was willing to fight for that. And John was really a great guy, and he was the anchor guy at the time, yeah.
Was Christine Devine there at the time?
Yes, she was there as well, and she's a very sweet woman, you know, but she was much younger than John and really didn't have the chops yet. But she's a really nice person, and she's really lasted in this town. She's had a great career here. Yeah.
How would you describe your early time at Fox? Was it everything you hoped it would be?
Oh, it was.
Were there any
more,
unexpected issues?
It was more than I hoped to be, because, like I say, we were given carte blanche to do almost anything we wanted. There was a producer that I'd worked with at Channel 2 who came over there at the same time. And we were interested in the same kind of things, you know, organized crime and what's happening out in the streets. And so immediately we got together and worked together. And he was a very fearless guy and got us into a lot of situations that could have gotten us killed, I suppose. Certainly got us a lot of death threats over the years. But yeah, those first 5 or 6 years at Fox were the most interesting of my career. I mean, we did a hell of a lot of stuff that nobody else was doing in this town.
Do you recall what was your first story at Fox?
Oh, I really can't remember. You know, there's been so many. People always ask me, what was your favorite story, or what do you remember? And you know, stories in a way are like children. You know, you wouldn't say you love one more than another.
I'd actually like to start with your coverage of Graffiti, if you don't mind. First, how do you get the idea to work on this subject?
Well, I think, you know, most of my ideas just come from like, and one reason I always like to work a little general assignment too, because you're out in the city and you see things and you talk to people, and that's where you get your ideas, you know. And when we started Fox Undercover, which was our investigative unit, at first it was just our ideas, but then as time went on, people were calling us with stories. You know, because I think when I was at Channel 2, I did a story, an Avenue Winwood story about aerospace and Northrop Corporation, and they were building the guidance system for the MX missile, and they were putting Radio Shack parts in an MX missile, so if we ever fired that missile, it was just as likely to hit Chicago as Moscow, you know. And that was a different kind of reporting. That was like going after a corporation, and that's fun too. And I think, you know, those people like that were corporate executives at a big company like that who have all kinds of money going in a way, they try to go after your job more than the Mexican mafia guys and stuff do, you know. They're big money, and they've got influence, and they come after you, and they try to get your job, you know.
Right. First, I want to ask a really important question. The name, Fox Undercover, who comes up with that name?
God, I can't remember. You know, I just can't remember, but it certainly worked, didn't it?
Yes, it did, definitely.
It became really, I'll tell you, those segments became the nucleus of Fox success in the 90s. It really did. I mean, they were the #3 station here for years. They didn't have any numbers since George Putnam was the anchorman there, you know, years ahead. And it really gave the signature to that station. And funny because subsequent, starting like in the late '90s, they kissed it off. They had new management come in, and they didn't realize what they had, and that was a real tragedy.
When basing your story on graffiti, what were your thoughts on graffiti back then? Because it was in the early beginnings. Was it a nuisance? Were you making the story so law enforcement would crack down on it more?
I mean, we started doing them just because you started seeing it everywhere, and we really didn't understand it, And when we got into it, you realize, there were just your graffiti guys who were just, scribbling their initials places, and then your piecers who were doing, murals and then beyond that, there were guys who were doing artwork, so I think we kind of defined it for people who didn't know the difference, And I think, I met so many of these kids. I mean, some really are gifted artists, and some of them, some of the murals you see in East LA, I mean, those are really, they're really neat. But the other thing is, I think what a lot of these kids don't, they all did it for fame. They'd all talk to you. In the '90s, people just wanted to be famous, and they put their name up or their tagger name or whatever, and it was all just about fame. And they all weren't artists, But for the guys who are really into the art, I get it. But, if you're a hardworking guy, a bus driver, and you live in Compton or something, and you got a couple kids, and you bought this house, and some guy's graffitiing all over your house, I mean, that's not right, and that, a kid doesn't understand, a man works hard to build a life and everything, and then some kid comes along and ruins a neighborhood with a bunch of graffiti and everything. It shouldn't be tolerated, I don't think,
How do you begin your journalistic process to covering the story? How do you go out and find the writers to interview? How do you get them to trust you?
Oh boy, sometimes you just show up in the neighborhood and just start talking to people, and they'll say, hey, so-and-so hangs out here, there. And then, as we really got going though, people would call up and they'd say, like, can you come to our neighborhood? This is happening here, there, And that, a lot of our stories just came from call-ins at that point, And then we had a couple of guys we hired, that were like, in their early 20s or so, who grew up in those neighborhoods, and sometimes we'd send them with a camera, at first, and then we'd come later. But it got to be when I'd show up at a party crew party or a tag banger place. They all knew who I was, So I didn't get a lot of bad reception, And I think they sort of understood what I was doing. I think, And there were some scary times too. You'd show up somewhere and there'd be some really hardcore gangsters there who wouldn't want you there, I remember once in El Monte we showed up and there was a Mexican mafia guy there, and there were some really bad actors and a gang there, and I lost my photographer, and I look over in the corner and like he's surrounded by these guys, about 5 guys. And I went up to them and I said, hey, what's going on or something? They said, what are you doing here or something? Well, it was a party crew guy who invited us to the party, but it happened to be in gang territory, so they all showed up. And I just said, hey, man, and I made the mistake of putting my hand on the guy's shoulder, and he's like I shouldn't have touched him. I said, if you don't want us here, we're leaving, And we turned around and we left, But later on, I got to know the Mexican mafia guy who was coming to that party, and he was laughing at me. He said, yeah, you left there, out of there. And I said, with your tail between your legs? I said, no, we just left. I said, I know when I'm not wanted. I'm not going to get in a fight with 8 guys with knives and guns in their pockets. I'm not that stupid.